Perfect. Well, today we're going to be talking about future-proofing your dam, some of the tips that are going to help you in that process. And in terms of the agenda, we'll talk about a little bit who Chris and I are, that cost of outgrowing your dam, how you determine what your needs are and what they will be, and how sometimes those evolving needs can affect your dam selection, and then some next steps on how to help prepare you. So, in terms of who Chris and I are, my name's Josh Van Dyke. I am the Vice President of North American Sales for Censhare, a enterprise level DAM, PIM, and CMS platform. Chris, maybe you could introduce yourself and maybe tell the group a little bit about Emmsphere Plus.
Sure. Thanks, Josh. Excited to be back here again, covering another important topic with you. I've been working in the DAM space for over 10 years now, starting at a major retailer and then working my way over into actually getting them to get with Censhare and then working with a consultant on Censhare. I've been working on implementations, enhancements, and development over the last 7 years on the consultant side. And then currently I lead the DAM practice at Emmsphere Plus. A little about Emmsphere Plus. We are here to work with our clients throughout their journey with advisory services, system agnostic choices, selection, maturity modeling. Then also, if they choose a solution that we do work with, we're able to work with implementation, solution change management, and support, managed services throughout the life cycle of their system, and also work on with their users because we're all about user adoption. So we want to make sure that that solution is implemented and adopted and used within that institution. We are partners with multiple solutions. We work very closely with Censhare. We are a platinum partner, and with our dev team, we've been working with them for basically since the beginning for 19 years. And we are one of the few partners that bring custom development team and create different modules that sit on top of Censhare.
Right on. And it's great to have such a partner like Emmsphere Plus that has such that variety of end-to-end services. I'm sure there's a lot of people on the call that know about Censhare. For those of you who don't, we've been really a pioneer in the DAM and PIM and CMS space for over the last 20 years. We're really built on the latest technology and continuing to evolve that tech stack so that we're always being built on that latest technology. I'd say one of the things we're most proud of is our retention rate is incredibly high. When organizations choose Censhare, they continue on with Censhare for years and years and years. We have a very vast network of subject matter experts with our partner network. And really, a lot of analysts consider Censhare more of a future-proof platform with the module structure. So let's talk a little bit about some of the growth issues. So growth issues that we see are a little bit of a misnomer, in my opinion. I think a lot of people think of, oh, I can start small and then get bigger, almost like you start like, oh, I'll buy a condo and then maybe I'll buy a small house when I outgrow the condo. And then if we get bigger, we have more kids, maybe we need more rooms and want a pool, we buy a bigger house, right? And that may work, even though there's a tremendous amount of fees involved in each of those purchases. You might be gaining in the property value so that when you sell it, you make some money. And you know what? That's kind of a pretty common philosophy to think of with almost anything. But with organizations, it's a different animal. And that's not really a very fiscally prudent approach, because you can't actually go ahead and sell the dam that you have, and it's not going to appreciate in value. So, when we look at the kind of the cost and the risk of outgrowing your dam, there's several of them. Some of them are kind of softer costs, maybe the time and effort of procuring the platform, who's involved in it, in that procurement process and their time and effort. Maybe your legal team and they have to review contracts and do red lines. But there are some also very hard costs, doing integrations a second time, doing an implementation a second time or a third time, overlapping license and support costs, and migration costs. And then Chris, you see this a lot on the project side is potential kind of training or user adoption issues. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, one of the biggest risks always is how is this going to affect your users? Anytime you have a major system change, it's the users at the end that are going to be really infected. And you want to make sure that you're not constantly changing things on them. A lot of times clients are going to be going from a folder structure, so no dam at all, and then moving into a dam, which makes it a lot easier, but it's a big change where people are used to being able to click through and find everything, where now you're going to searching and changing up how they work. If you then now change a system again because it didn't really have everything you needed 2 years down the line, those people are not going to be happy, and they may not actually end up using the system and go back to those file shares. So that makes it even harder for the user adoption. So then you have more training, more change management, and then you have more issues that you have to deal with. Some of those soft costs can really start to add up too by user attrition and people just don't wanting to work with the system.
For sure. And so we put together a little slide on what do those costs actually look like, right? And because we don't know all the organizations on the webinar today, we kind of put some lower numbers that are maybe more, small and mid-sized businesses, and some higher, more enterprise level numbers. And I think even on the high side, they could go significantly higher than that, depending on the size of the organization. But we've kind of divided these out into the soft costs, which are costs of the time of the team that's working on this, the hard costs, things you're going to have to do again, and then those kind of risks that are also available there. And as you can see, those costs actually add up really quickly. So oftentimes when people select I have this pesky business problem I need to solve, and they just get this lightweight solution that they're outgrowing in a few years, any cost savings that they had by selecting that lighter weight platform are now gone when they have to redo everything again. So really important to kind of avoid that scenario and learn from others is to have a North Star vision on, hey, what does that look like? What do we need today? What do we need in the future? And Chris, you work with organizations on developing that North Star vision. So maybe you could tell our attendees a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's really important to not just solve for that little business case that you were talking about, and really see where are we now, what do we need in the next 3, 5, 10 years as an organization, especially as an enterprise organization, and not just thinking like, hey, I want to be able to find images easier, because that's not going to get you down the line. And there's many different ways that you need to be able to do that. So we have 5 key steps to really help you find that North Star vision so that you are going to be set for success in the future. First off, you need to define an oversight group, or like a governance group that is going to run the process. This needs to include the key stakeholders from different departments, marketing, IT, and anything else that is going to be heavily involved in the dam. But you also need to make sure that you have leadership oversight. This team is going to be tasked for managing the process from start to finish, and also making sure that everyone is included. So the first step really is going to make sure you do stakeholder mapping. So find those stakeholders that are going to be involved within the process. And you might not know all of them off the bat, so there's going to be a lot of interviews and a lot of discussions that have to happen. So it's important to meet with all these different representatives to make sure their voices are heard, so that you know that you're not going to be caught with a surprise down the line. Maybe there's a team that right now you would never think is going to be a part of the dam, but they may have a process that says like, hey, we need to use these images or these videos and transcode them and do this with it. But it might not be right off the bat, but down the line, you're going to need to have that accounted for. So knowing that is going to be very important. Also, it's important to perform requirements, matrix gathering, and then also figure out where you are. So this is all about where are you now. So what are your needs? What are the needs mapped out into high, medium, and low? And then what is going to be the most important for you? Because this is going to then set what you're going to need to do going forward. If you have a system already, it'd be good to do a maturity model and assess really where you are today. Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? Maybe you're really strong in user adoption for search on your internal employees, but maybe some of your external employees or the other companies that you work with aren't really using your dam, and people are having to find it and send it off to them. Performing these different assessments makes it really easier for you to know where you need to start off with to then work down the line. You also need to understand what is in your MarTech stack. So do a MarTech stack inventory. What do you currently have? What is planned to come down the line? What is it that's missing, and what can also be replaced? Maybe you're going to be looking at a system like Censhare, which is a DAM, a PIM, and a CMS. And maybe you don't even have a PIM right now, or your PIM might be outdated. So you can replace that with one solution and have everything in one place. And then finally, it's all about determining the roadmap. So you need to figure out the phases to accomplish your vision. Enterprise system that's going to grow with your needs over time isn't going to happen overnight. Using your assessments and then also determining your greatest needs, you can get some quick wins and then drive that adoption to make sure your system is successful and it's going to continue to grow with you.
And by the way, Chris, by doing these 5 different things and creating the documentation around that, These are areas that if you have that information documented will help you sell the project later on down the line when you need to approach executives on, hey, here's why we need to make this move and why we need another system. Here's all the efficiencies that can be created. Here's, based on our MarTech systems that could be deprecated. And these are big things in terms of savings of dollars and hours that will really make it much easier to sell the project later on. So Chris, we kind of broke down 6 different areas, and we talked a little bit about, the evolving needs of an organization and how that affects the dam selection. And so we have these 6 different areas that we will be talking about today. Now, granted, there are more than this that we could talk about, but in 30 minutes, these are the ones that we've chosen to talk about what we think are pretty important. And so let's start with the first one in terms of the total number of assets that an organization has and will have.
Yeah. So your number of assets are going to continue to grow. So you may have 1 million assets, 100,000 assets, 100 million assets. Users need to make sure that they can access those by search, browsing, be able to download them, use them. Not being able to use them, it makes the dam no good for you. So lightweight platforms will run into a performance issue once you have too many assets in that system. When you have too many assets in the system, you'll start to get that little spinning beach ball of death that everybody hates, and people are going to stop using it. So they're going to start storing assets locally. They're not going to put them into the dam. They're not going to search, and then your dam is not going to be useful anymore. So the way to solve this or solution is to choose a system that has made sure they've done that performance testing on the number of assets. So you want to make sure that it's scalable to meet your needs. Maybe you only have 100,000 assets right now, but you could add in another company or you're adding new product lines. So that is going to grow. So make sure you know what is coming down the line. Censhare has worked with clients with over 50 million assets in their system. They don't have the performance issues because they've been able to test this. And the patented graph database behind Censhare allows for that fast performance while searching, accessing the assets, and using them in the many different ways that is allowed.
Yeah. And, Chris, I know there's a lot of systems that start giving you that spinning beach ball right around 1 million or 2 million assets, depending on the system. And there may be people on this call today that go, well, Josh, I only have like 500,000 assets. And for those of you who might not have a dam, what happens is when you load them in the dam, you can also have renditions that are automatically created of different file types or different resolution sizes that can add to the number of assets. And also the number of assets that an organization has is growing exponentially. And so, no matter what the number you have today is, you can know that in 2 and 3 years, that number is going to be significantly higher. So always good to plan for that, because the last thing you want is that spinning beach ball and then now no one uses the platform, right? Let's talk about the next one here, the size of the assets. So, it's interesting. There are platforms that often limit the size that can be just naturally ingested, where I can just drag it into my, web application and ingest it on my own. I have to do some sort of workaround to get to it. And oftentimes that size is around 8 gigabytes. And in fact, I was on a call at about 2 months ago, and I was talking to the prospect, and they were like, yeah, it's so funny when we drag certain videos in, it errors out or it times out and it doesn't work. And it was actually the platform they had, I thought, was a fairly enterprise, probably the most well-known brand in the space. And so, it's something really important to check. Do they have those restrictions? Because shooting video in 4K and now 6K, and of course that's always going to get bigger and bigger, is one of those things that is going to easily get to that size limit pretty quickly, right? So when we look at the solution of these types of things, making sure that that platform doesn't limit you in the kind of the file size. And again, it's not just the file size, but how you manually upload it, right? Sure, you could always, have some sort of workaround, but Chris, your thoughts on that as well, what you've seen in projects.
Yeah, it's very important to make sure that you're not bumping up against some like artificial limit like file size. We have clients that are uploading, hundreds of videos at a time, and to make their performance a lot easier for them, because, especially with remote working, I'll touch on this a little bit more now coming up, is not everybody has a good internet connection at home. So let's figure out a way to get that in quicker. So making sure you have those options too. It's not a workaround, but other ways to bring it in. And something else that's very important too is to make sure that you're not limited on file type. So like Censhare allows you to do anything can be an asset in the system. So there's new files coming out all the time, especially when you're looking at raw images or raw video, that you want to be able to make sure that the system is going to be able to handle that as well, and not have some limits around not only the size, but also the type within there, to make sure that you're open to be able to work, and especially future-proofing yourself down the line.
Right on.
So as I kind of alluded to now, user location is also a big one too, especially with many people working remote now. So beyond back, 3-4 years ago, you wouldn't have people being out of the office as much. You may have multiple locations if you're a enterprise or a global company, but now it's very common for people to be spread across the United States or across the globe. And a lot of lightweight dams don't have that ability to have multiple locations. They have one server location, and the further you get away from that location, it's harder for you to connect, or they're going to install it on right in your server farm. And again, maybe you have to have VPN then, and all kinds of different issues that you have. So the solution for that is to make sure you have the ability to distribute servers globally. Obviously globally if you need to be, or at least across the United States to where your locations are. And Censhare is very flexible in this way. So you can be in the cloud or on-premise, or even in a hybrid on-premise cloud solution, to make sure that you're able to have the users have the best ability to access the system as possible.
Yeah, again, if you're not hearing the theme here, which is in a lot of these problems, the problem becomes, hey, now, gosh, it's slow, or I'm getting the beach ball, or this is happening, or I tried to load this and it errored. When you start to have that, you start to have people that don't want to use the system. And then you have people storing things on their local desktop or on a Google Drive or whatever it may be. So if you're hearing a reoccurring theme, that may be because it's true and it's on purpose. So let's talk a little bit about permissions. This is one that I think every single dam vendor, Chris, will say, yeah, we have rights and permissions. Every single one will say that. But the problem is the granularity and the flexibility within their permission sets. So oftentimes how permission structures are set up, it's based on a folder structure. So if I create a folder of assets that I want to collaborate with a certain group, I'm going to give access to those assets to that folder. So I'll give that user group access to that folder. But the problem with that is as you grow and as you expand, maybe you add another division that you want to be able to come into this, or you acquire another company, or maybe even just the people right now that you want to collaborate on that group. Maybe you don't want them to be able to do everything within that group, within that asset. So you might want them to be able to view it, but not download it, or view and download, but not edit it. Or maybe they can do those things once it's hit a certain workflow step. So, when we talk about solutions on that, is making sure that the permission set is incredibly flexible and can get really granular down to the metadata level or the workflow step, not just the folder that it's in. And, again, asking the right questions. And Chris and I actually, for those of you on the call, we've actually developed what are the specific questions you want to ask, the deep dive questions on each of these that we can share with you a little bit later. But Chris, you work on a lot of different projects. What are some of the things you're seeing on the permission sets?
Everybody thinks that they have a simple idea of what they want to do, but then when they get into their workflows, they know that, like, okay, well, we don't want this person to see it until it's this point, or we want this person to be able to download it, or we want to make sure that they ask for permission, and all these different things that end up once you really dive deep into it. And you want to make sure that it's flexible. We have a couple of different clients we're working with right now where we're trying to change their permissions after the fact. And some systems, it's not the easiest to do that in. Whereas Censhare allows you to set up your structure that you have, but then also because of the fact that you can take it down to the workflow step and workflow state, it's easy to change what people can do at any point along that workflow. So you want to make sure that it's very flexible and very easy for that to be done, changed in the future. Because maybe off the bat, you think that a folder structure and just having, or even like a location, hey, you could do anything you want here, but then more and more things end up there. And people are like, well, why'd you use that in this presentation? You shouldn't. It's because we have those permissions that aren't always that flexible. So that's something that's always very important, is that flexibility to grow with is huge.
Right on, right on. Well, let's talk about APIs. This is a big topic.
Yes, API, one of my favorites to talk about, and one that you ask anybody, they'll have an API now. I mean, like, I was just looking for a new dishwasher, and they have the ability to hook up to an API with that now too. So it's kind of crazy how these APIs have been changing. But within the DAM and your MarTech stack, you want to make sure that you're able to talk between your DAM and everything else that's there. So everybody says they have one, but a lot of people will limit you to what their API connections are that they've already connected. So if you want to connect to a legacy piece of information or something else, you're kind of out of luck if they don't want to choose it. Or they also might throttle you on the number of connections you can make at a time and also the throughput of that information. So maybe you can only get 100 pieces of data back or forth within there, and it could very much slow you down as you're trying to connect these two systems together. So to solve for that, you want to make sure that the system has very mature API calls and also very robust documentation. So it's important that you can extend it to meet your needs, and you're not going to be limited in those calls. So they're not going to throttle you. Censure's robust API is part of its open architecture that allows you or a partner to extend it in many different ways. And there's also not a limit on those calls or connections from your system. We have run into it that we've connected to other systems that we still run into that limitation. But on the Censhare side, we don't have that problem. And we're able to connect really between anything that has an open architecture or an API and Censhare, and we're able to do that.
Yeah. And, this is something I saw just recently, someone reaching out to us saying, hey, we got all the way, we implemented this system, and now we connected the API and we're getting throttled. They're limiting the number of calls we can do, so we can't get the information quick enough. And so the API, although they had an open API and they said, yes, we can connect, it didn't help them because they weren't getting the information. If you're not getting the information either fast enough or at all, what's the point, right? So we want to make sure that we have a good solution for that and ask the right question around that. Let's dive into our last topic here around changing business needs. There's always going to be needs that are changing. If a person's been with an organization for several years, they've seen it. They've seen how quickly those needs can change. And most vendors will actually say, hey, this is the feature set and the dam is locked down. If you want a new feature to meet this new need that you have, you're going to need to make that request, and we'll maybe put it on the roadmap. But oftentimes what happens is they look at it and they go, that's really cool. That's really interesting. We'll put that on the roadmap for 2 to 3 or never from now in terms of the number of years, because they don't have anybody else that has that need, right? So you want to look for, in terms of solutions, platforms that are open architecture, okay, that can be flexibly extended and easily upgraded in the future. And I think those are kind of really important, because as your needs change, you need to be able to, build out a feature. You might say, hey, now we need a little button here. When I click that button, it does this transformation and pushes data here, whatever it may be. And if you had to wait 2 years for that, that's just not going to work for your organization. So it allows you to say, all right, great, I'm going to be able to know that if I have a change in the needs that we have, either my organization is going to be able to build out that feature, or there's a partner network of experienced people that can also just build out that feature for me. Chris, you see this all the time, and this is one of the big reasons why people mature out of a platform.
Yeah, this is one of the biggest things that we see, that we deal with day in and day out, that somebody wants to be like, hey, the system does this, but we have to do 5 clicks. Can you make it easier? And we're like, hey, if we do this, we add this button here, or change this UI. Let's simplify things for users. Some systems allow you to only run automations based off of one panel where you can click on it and you get this whole list to like schedule a job. We want to try to make it as easy as possible for the end users, but then also want to make sure that you're able to upgrade that solution. We've heard of different platforms out there that you can get an open architecture system, or you can get one where they're going to keep adding features. If you choose open architecture, you can't upgrade unless you pull out your code, get the upgrade, put your code back in there. We're able to work with Censhare to be able to make all these customizations and all these configuration changes, but still be able to stay upgraded in the future, because you never know what's going to come up. And there's lots of different ways it's going to happen. So somebody can throw out a one-time idea. We can make that change. Maybe they change their process in the future. We can continue to tweak that, but they're still able to be going. And Josh, you have like a great analogy when you talk about like, how do you know what is going to be coming up with that too?
Yeah, I think of it as kind of like a student path and a master path, right? So the student path will say, hey, I have these known problems, or what I would call the known knowns, right? And if you are on the student path, you go, these are our problems. Let's quickly find a solution that can solve those problems. And this is where you run into the problem of, gosh, now in 2 years I've outgrown a solution. I didn't really think about that, and I got to reprocure. But the second way on the master path is, you have your known unknowns. And, if you listen to what Chris said earlier in those 5 steps, you should start to uncover some of those known unknowns, which is, if we brought on this department, we may want to have this type of module, or we may need to be able to do this. Some of these forecasting out for next year, the following year, 3 years, 4 years from now, who could be involved in them. So that's along the student to master path, is knowing your known knowns and your known unknowns. But the true master path is also knowing your unknown unknowns, right? And of course, you might be saying, well, Josh, how can I know my unknown unknowns? And the answer is you actually can't, but you can procure a system that has open architecture and allows you to solve for those unknown unknowns in the future, right? We kind of went through a lot today, Chris. And so we do have some next steps for people who are interested in maybe getting some of those questions, or maybe going through some of that maturity. Chris, let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. First, we definitely suggest that you determine your North Star vision if you haven't already. The 5 steps that we mapped out will help you get to that. It's important to follow those steps to make sure that you're choosing the solution for the long term that can grow with you. And you're not just trying to find a solution for like one problem. Make sure that you're looking out into the future. Second, we have a dam maturity model that Emmsphere has put together with our Senior Vice President of Advisory Services, Francisco Ruiz, which can be found on our Emmsphere website. So we have a webinar there that you can look at that will introduce the whole topic to you and give you some ideas of how to go forward with it. But then we can also happy to answer any questions that you could have if you watch that, or also we can schedule some time together to work through the actual exercise with you as well. And then finally, as Josh has been saying, we have some top questions to ask when identifying the right platform. So we have the 6 key areas that we have with all the different questions that we've talked about within here. But then we also have some bonus different areas to give you some more ideas so that you can make sure that you're getting the right solution to help you be future-proof going forward.
Yeah, it was interesting. If you caught things on the webinar today, there's things like, hey, every platform says they have an open API, but are you asking the granular enough question, or the question after the question, to know that I'm asking, oh, well, do you limit the API calls? What's your documentation look like? And so we've actually listed out all of those questions. So if people would like that, and like Chris said, I think there's another 8 bonus topics that we have questions for as well. So it's actually a really comprehensive list. For those who are procuring it, you can either email me if you'd like the list of questions. Feel free just to email me and I can email those back to you. If you're interested more in that, hey, what does this North Star vision look like? How do I go through a dam maturity model? How do I start to have that internal assessment? I would recommend emailing Chris, as their organization can do that. Or if you just like to talk and say, hey, I we're not quite there yet, but I'd like to pick your brains on a few things, feel free to email Chris and I. We'd be delighted to have a conversation with you. One other thing that I will bring up that I saw in the chat was around rights management. And that is something I think we addressed in the questions. But there was a question in there around rights management. If we bought an image and they said, here, maybe we could use it in the US, but not in Europe, is there a way for that to be managed inside the platform? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And in fact, it can get really robust, and even more robust with videos, let's say with many different actors or something like that in there. Chris, maybe you could just shed a little bit of light on that in the remaining time that we have.
Yeah, there's many different ways to handle rights management, especially if you buy something from like a stock imagery like Getty. They'll actually embed that rights information into that image, so that when you import it into Censhare, it can actually pull that out and have that all set up so people can see it. From that, you can then limit people to download it, limit people to place it, and then make sure that people understand where they can use it if they're going to use it externally too. So there's lots of different ways to set it up. And it's something that's another exercise within itself, just like the granular permissions. You want to make sure that you have a robust rights management platform as well.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, now we are at time. So I appreciate everyone who has joined us today. This will be recorded. And we are also going to be at the Henry Stewart Los Angeles event. So for those of you who are thinking, oh, it might be good to get some more information, you can meet with us in person March 23 and 24 in Los Angeles. in Hollywood. It'll be a great event with a lot of really interesting speakers. So feel free to join us for that. Again, we thank everyone for joining today.